My name is Ryan Fisher. I'm an investigative journalist and explorer, and I'm applying the tools of my trade to all things Nephite. I'm launching into a series of investigations into Nephite archaeology, scriptural history, and prophecies about latter-day America. This is Nephite Explorer. On Nephite Explorer, I set out to investigate teachings, prophecies, and lessons the Book of Mormon prophets left us in their ancient account. My investigation into prophecies about latter-day America has led me to Plymouth, Massachusetts, to the place where the Pilgrims came ashore. Even though the Pilgrims did not know it at the time, they were fulfilling Book of Mormon prophecy, as described by Nephi.
Now I've come here to Plymouth in the rain on this drizzly day to investigate a prophecy by the prophet Nephi as found in the Book of Mormon. Here we read in chapter 13, "And it came to pass that I looked and beheld many waters, and they divided the Gentiles from the seed of my brethren. And it came to pass that the angel said unto me, Behold, the wrath of God is upon the seed of thy brethren. And it came to pass that I beheld the Spirit of God, that it wrought upon other Gentiles, and they went forth out of captivity upon the many waters. And I beheld the Spirit of the Lord, that it was upon the Gentiles, and they did prosper and obtain the land for their inheritance. And it came to pass that I, Nephi, beheld that the Gentiles who had gone forth out of captivity did humble themselves before the Lord, and the power of the Lord was with them." Here we read that the Gentiles, the Pilgrims and Puritans, came out of captivity to the Promised Land. Now, is this the same Promised Land that Lehi came to? Nephi answers that in chapter 13. "Nevertheless, thou beholdest that the Gentiles who have gone forth out of captivity and have been lifted up by the power of God above all other nations upon the face of the land, which is choice above all other lands, which is the land that the Lord God hath covenanted with thy father, that his seed should have for the land of their inheritance." Here we read that the land that Lehi came to and was covenanted to him as an inheritance for him and his posterity is the same land that the Pilgrims came to, and they received this land as an inheritance for them under covenant also. It's the same land. It's as simple as that. And in chapter 13 of the first book of Nephi, he spells that out crystal clear, that this is the same place, the same events. And so the covenant on this land is the same that was here for the Nephites, was here for the Pilgrims, and they prospered because of that covenant.
I'm here in Plymouth to search out the rest of the story, to see how this prophecy from Nephi came to fruition. To find out, I'm meeting with author and scholar Bruce Porter, author Timothy Ballard, along with local pastor Paul Jaley and local historian Leo Martin.
All right, so we're here at Plymouth Plantation, and this is a pretty historical site because in light of the restored gospel, we have example of the descendants of Ephraim coming together, meeting with the tribe of Manasseh. And these people that lived on this ground, they were here to fulfill prophecy. Did some of them know that?
I think that some of them probably did. There were other places that they could go to. There were other places they wanted to go to. But in some of their diaries, they write that they felt inspired, or they felt that they had to come to this new land.
Just before the Pilgrims set sail, just listen to what Pastor John Robinson said to them. Quote, "Here also he put us in mind of our church covenant, at least that part of it whereby we promise and covenant with God and one another to receive whatsoever light or truth shall be made known to us from his written word. Now as the people of God in old time were called out of Babylon civil, the place of their bodily bondage, and were to come to Jerusalem, and there to build the Lord's temple, so are the people of God now to go out of Babylon spiritual to Jerusalem, and to build themselves as lively stones into a spiritual house or temple for the Lord to dwell in. For we are the sons and daughters of Abraham by faith." I just can't even imagine the amount of courage and faith it must have taken for these sailors to leave their homeland and embark into a completely unknown world. This is a replica of the ship, the Mayflower, that set sail and arrived here on American shores in the 1600s.
If the 3-month lonely voyage across the ocean wasn't frightening enough, they arrived to a land of wilderness, hostile natives, and beasts of prey, entirely dependent on their own abilities and providential guidance for survival. It is beginning to make sense to me that their greatest tool may have been a knowledge of the covenants of Israel, a people who did the same thing thousands of years earlier. Is this where the covenant came ashore to America?
This is really the first obvious, the first clearly stated manifestation of the covenant on this land. And it was the force and power and reason that these Pilgrims and the Puritans and the early settlers came here. It's the first words they uttered as they landed here on this spot.
Upon arriving on American shores in 1620 after a treacherous journey across the ocean, according to William Bradford, their leader, they, quote, fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean. Is there evidence that these people were the Ephraimites from ancient Israel? Did they believe that? Is there any other evidence to support that?
If you believe their words, yes. They came here, they called themselves the New Israel. They named their towns after Israelite towns. Salem, for example, that's a derivative of Jerusalem. They felt they were building the new Jerusalem. They felt they were renewing the covenants of Israel. These are their words. They named their children after ancient Hebrew names. So yes, they felt this in their hearts. Jeremiah says that the covenant is written in your heart. And the covenants of ancient Israel were indeed written in the hearts of these settlers. And they invoked the covenant when they got here. And they called it the covenant. They used that exact terminology.
When the Pilgrims would speak of the covenant, they were talking about primarily the covenant between themselves and God. That God had extended His grace to them. They had voluntarily received that, and therefore they were in covenant with God.
And it was kind of a 1-2 punch, because when John Winthrop and the Puritans showed up, not too far away from here, it's the same pattern repeats itself. Listen to this, what John Winthrop says. John Winthrop says, "Thus stands the cause between God and us. We are entered into covenant with Him for this work. Now if the Lord shall please to hear us and bring us peace to the place we desire, then hath He verified this covenant and sealed our commission."
Their fulfillment of that covenant would bring blessings. Like Deuteronomy 28 would tell you, they would look at, well, if you walk in obedience to God and in agreement with God and you don't violate His covenant, when you do that, then these blessings will flow. You will be prosperous. You will see yourself lending to others rather than having to borrow. All these things that are promised in Deuteronomy 28. Now, of course, they understood the other part of Deuteronomy 28. If you're not obedient to the covenant, then all these curses will come upon you. This was very common understanding.
So the Pilgrims had this understanding of this covenant they were making with God that would ensure them blessings if they kept that covenant. Is that a covenant that is still here today?
Well, when we say the Pilgrims coming here, you might say that that covenant still exists in the sense that when the Pilgrims signed the Mayflower Compact, when they then ratified their Constitution in 1636, and other settlements began to form in New England, and there were others in America, but when they would do that and write their civil documents, in a sense you could say, surely, being the first settlers coming here and Europeans, they were forming a covenant that future generations were to continue. A covenant is multi-generational. It goes from one generation to the next because you are agreeing with God's covenant of blessings. That covenant of blessings in Deuteronomy 28 was not just for you. You'll notice if you read through those verses, and the Pilgrims took these very, very seriously, as well as the Puritans later on. No, it was going to come to your children and your grandchildren. So that covenant they made with God, you might in essence say this nation was founded on a covenant with God by the Pilgrims that was intended to be multi-generational.
The relevance to today is what we should be doing. We shouldn't stop doing what they did. We should be petitioning God for what we should do.